we're live. So, hello, Bill. Welcome, welcome. I am delighted. Dr. Mary Marshall, lovely to see you this afternoon out there across the Americas. Joining me, of course, today is none other than Jane Chapman, all the way from tomorrow, where Jane joins us for early in the morning out in New Zealand, and where the day starts well before all of us, well before Australia. I will point out our little geography lesson. And I wanted her to tell us a little bit about her amazing series of stories that she started back in was it was several months ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like May or maybe even before that, this wonderful series of her ancestors who coincidentally fought during the American Revolution. And the best part is all different sides. And I found that is such a fascinating story. Welcome, Mar. It's delightful to have you join us today. As we go through this as an American, frankly, yeah, the 4th of July is a big deal to us because it's our way of this relatively new country to say, hey, we happened, and we happened because of an idea. And that's the idea, is what we like to celebrate. Well, this year, things are going to be a little bit different starting in 2026. So I thought we would celebrate the idea, the stories, and how our families played a role in those stories. And it doesn't have to be in the United States. It can be in Canada. It can be across the pond, across the oceans. And that's what this is taking us into. I'm calling this Stories 250 instead of the America 250 and Declaration 250 and Independence 250. There's a lot of other people leveraging the same idea. So today joining me is Jane Chapman from New Zealand, who is going to tell us a little bit about the 2 stories that she's written. And I've now pulled into our timeline and map. So go ahead, Jane, tell us about your stories.
Right. Well, there were a couple I wrote, really. Sorry, I'm losing my voice now. That's terrible. I'll just have a sip of water.
There you go. That's because I was losing my voice so much last week, but I'm all better now. Go.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There were 2 I wrote about. One was Samuel Gray, who fought for the Patriots, and one was Richard Lang, who fought for the Royalists. So I'll tell you a bit about them. Mainly I'll talk about Richard because I don't really know a lot about Samuel, to be honest. I was fortunate that Samuel stood up in court at the age of 81 to talk about his service in response to the 1832 Act of Congress that allowed war veterans a pension. And so he had to declare under oath what he'd done. And if he hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't know what he'd done. But he was on the North Carolina Continental Line and fought for the Patriots, and would have been about 23 when the war started. He, amongst other places, was at the Battle of Kings Mountain, which, as it happens, before I even knew I was related to him, I visited when I was in America, so I was pleased I did. He didn't actually fight in the battle. He was actually made to stay at camp and look after the prisoners and transport them. So, I don't know a lot about Samuel, so I'll actually move on to talk about Richard, because there's a lot to talk about Richard. I probably should say before I carry on, some people might be wondering what's someone in New Zealand doing with American ancestry. I'm actually an immigrant myself to New Zealand, but I was born in the UK and I have an American father. My biological father was from Texas, so that's how I get my American ancestry. So Robert Lang he lived in South Carolina. His family was well established in South Carolina. All his grandparents had been born there. His mother's family went back even further, I think. And they were quite well off. They were quite happily in the British colony of South Carolina. And so when the war came along, he chose to go with the Loyalists. He had brothers that went the other way, which shows how war can split families. So I guess he thought he was on the right side of things until he wasn't. And then in about 1782, there was a evacuation of Loyalists. It was just before the war ended, but they were evacuating Loyalist soldiers and families out of South Carolina and Georgia into British East Florida. And he's on a list of Loyalist refugees there in 1793, but I think he went earlier in 1792 with his family and started to try and make a life there in British East Florida. I think also he was probably doing the odd foray back into Georgia and South Carolina with his loyalist activities. But he started to set up life there. And then things went all topsy-turvy again when the war did finish, because the Treaty of Paris, which was signed in September 1783, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, also had some other little treaties, and one of those little treaties, the British surrendered West and East Florida to the Spanish. So now he found himself living in a Spanish colony. And he, like many others, did take an oath of loyalty to the King of Spain, and became a Spanish citizen and started to build his life there. And it was quite good until, I guess, the Spanish were quite suspicious of all the immigrants, especially people of Anglo origin that had come in as refugees. And the
irony. Oh, the irony.
So I find out. I've got to just note here of dates so I don't forget.
Yeah, that's okay. For what it's worth, most Americans struggle with these dates too. So this is unbelievable that you've got all this. But keep going.
By the 1790s, many of the immigrants, including Richard, were becoming a bit dissatisfied. There was a lack of commercial and political freedom in Spanish East Florida. And in 1791, he was actually the magistrate to St. Mary's River at that time. So he did have a position in society, but the Spanish were really quite suspicious of him. And he actually lost that position at one point when he left to go and attend to some business, and they appointed someone else because they weren't quite sure about it. And while he was there, as a magistrate, he complained at some point that the people could not get medicines. They were living too far from St. Augustine, and they couldn't get them from Georgia because there were severe trade restrictions, and that caused a lot of illegal trading as well. So there was a lot going on that the Spanish were trying to crack down on as well. And because they tended to tar all the immigrants with the same brush, they were tending to, be really suspicious, even where there was no need to be suspicious. But they did actually need to be watchful, because by 1791, the Americans, along with French agents, were planning to invade. So, and some of the immigrants were colluding with them. So they did have to be a bit watchful. But yeah, the problem was they tarred everyone with the same brush, and Richard ended up being arrested on suspicion of conspiracy. So that was real filming work for him, because not only was he imprisoned without any evidence. He was in solitary confinement. He was in a damp cell. He got unwell. And while all that was going on, the Spanish decided on emergency measures, and they went into where he lived, and all the settlers there were told to evacuate, and they burnt all their property and all their crops. And they did that so that any Americans coming in to invade would have nothing to live on, nowhere, to take over. Yeah.
Right. He would pluck the
So,
farms. Yeah.
yeah. So you can see why they did that. But, of course, when they finally let Richard out of prison, he was unwell. They had no evidence, so they had to let him out. And then he ended up in hospital with a big medical bill, and his family had been displaced. And he wasn't a happy chappy, let's say. Not at all. He was very angry. I actually think that Richard, I think some writers don't think of him as kindly as I do, but I think he was actually quite a very loyal sort of person when he was loyal, when he was being treated right. And he actually gave the Spanish a last chance. He said he wrote them a letter from Georgia, and he more or less said, give me some compensation. All this has happened. Give me some compensation and I won't bother you. I won't do anything um, to hurt Spain, but give me some compensation because all these things have happened. But he finished it off with a very blunt statement. If you don't pay up by this date, you can expect a rebellion.
We call that something, don't we? Let's see. What is that called?
And
It could be very uncomfortable for you. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, it was not good, really. And
Hey, this is
there
a
were a lot
movie.
of other
This is a
people
movie.
similarly.
But wait, there's more.
Yeah, I mean, there were lots of other people similarly aggrieved, and so um, they sort of sat around and thought up what to do next, and that out of that came the 95 East Florida Rebellion, which Richard led. So, yeah, it began in June 95, sorry, and Richard was the head of an army of 72 men, and several other men joined him later. But it was very short-lived. They didn't get much help from people inside East Florida, and the Spanish, were too good for them, and they all ended up dispersing. And the Spanish charged about 67 or 68 men with rebellion, and about half escaped to Georgia. Richard and his son Isaac both escaped to Georgia. So it was about half and half captured, half escaped. And I've just got here, they tried them in absentia, but I'll just pull out this piece of paper because it actually says what the sentence was, and I want to read it to get it right. They were all tried in absentia, and found guilty. And those who escaped, Richard included, if they were to be caught, were to be taken to the Castillo de San Marcos, the prison, in the city, from where they will be taken by force, and a rope will be placed around the neck of each one, and they will be pulled by the tail of a horse, their crimes being announced by a crier who will walk in front of them to the square, where they will be hanged from the gibbet by the executioner, and no one will impede the process or say that the sentence is too harsh. They will hang there until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when the executioner will publicly sever their heads and arms for the purposes of displaying them at the post of St. Nicholas.
Hey, these are people who were inspired by the French Revolution, or inspired.
Yeah.
Wow.
As it turned out, the Spanish, their butt was worse than their bite, actually, because even the people that were captured who were sentenced to death only got a short a short prison sentence. There were no death sentences. Um, so, yeah.
Toothless tigers.
They
So then
also
how
had,
does he go on?
pardon?
The story
How what?
goes on.
Oh, the story does go on. Yeah, he sort of set up his life in Georgia. Th- they also said that they would take away any property, but he was given back his property, which was just land because things had been burnt on it. But he was given that back, and he set up his life in Georgia. He became an American citizen in 7th of March, 1799. Um, and I think he was someone who liked to be prominent in the community. About 5 years later, he was a magistrate at St Mary's and stayed there until he died in 1817. So I think once he became American citizen, again, he was loyal to the Americans, but there was underneath a sort of relationship with Augustus Bowles, and Augustus Bowles was he had formed an independent state in North Florida, which is part of Spanish East Florida, which he called the state of Muscovy, and it was intended to be an independent state aligned to Great Britain. So you can see how Richard would have had some sympathies with him because he hated the Spanish and he felt good about the British. And at one point, Bowles wrote to Richard Lang and asked him to raise a force to help him. Richard Lang got drunk one night and left the letter lying around where everybody found it. Whoops. And to extract himself from that, he actually wrote to the governor and said that he'd been approached by Bowles, because, I mean, that was not going to do any harm. Now it was all out there and he needed to protect himself. So that's what he did. But I don't think, I think that he continued to have talks with Bowles and was quite sympathetic to Bowles's cause. But at the same time, he was making a life for himself in America and being a good American citizen. um,
Wow. So
yeah,
you've got a
so
comment here from Dr. Mary Marshall referencing her own dissertation. I'll give you a second to read that. And I just wanted to say to all of you in the audience, oh my goodness, look at how was that a 6-part, 8-part story that you shared as a series on
yeah,
Substack became is such a compelling read, but then the retelling of it because its own kind of story. And I think that's something that we keep coming back to as Projectkin, looking at how we, on one hand, study the history with the careful review of what we have in the documents, what the dates and names and places and documentary history we have, but on the other is to tell the story from your own family to be able to see where what it all meant and how it all felt. And here, as you characterize a story, that's something, that subtle distinction of someone who really always felt loyal to the British doesn't really come through, except for all of that drama, well, to me
yeah,
anyway, in my reading of them, of the drama of the catch, of the chase, of the battles,
mm,
which is pretty extraordinary all by itself. And I think, yeah, it really reflects the craziness of the history at the time. And,
yeah,
the idea of hanging people and quartering them and dragging them through the streets
yeah.
is this bloodthirstiness that we don't see again we see in France by 1789, right? So yeah, I'm sorry that now you've had a chance to see where Dr.
I
Mary
haven't
was
had
going.
a chance. I
Oh,
haven't read Mary's comment. Sorry, because
th-
my
that's okay.
computer had gone to sleep, and when I
Uh,
went
it's got
when I went to put it on again, it only shows comments that are written after you go into it. So I
it.
can't read Mary's comment. Sorry, Mary.
That's okay. I've got it for you here. I read about these conflicts in researching my dissertation, which included a general history of how Georgia became a colony. The British, French, English conflict over control of Georgia necessitated my dive into this history. I would love to have had your story for my dissertation defense. Thank you for sharing, Jane.
Oh, thank you, Mary.
That's the subtlety for the rest, speaking as an American that had no experience in the United States when I studied American history, the idea of these layers and layers of world powers quibbling over the property in the Americas is hard to really appreciate till you see the money involved, right? Those plantations in places like Georgia were pretty extraordinary, which of course leads to the next war, or
Mm,
wars that follow, right? just fascinating to see how our families were directly involved in all of this.
Mm. Richard eventually sold his plantation in East Florida to his friend. That was in 1817, which is the year he died. Um, and he got 5,000 US dollars for it, I believe. I don't know what that is in today's money.
Sounds like a lot.
It
Yeah.
sounds like a lot, doesn't it? Mm.
Yes.
I'm told that he's buried in Jefferson, Georgia. After I wrote that those posts, I was contacted by a descendant of Isaac Lang, who's Richard's son. Um, he got in touch with me and he told me that he's buried there, but I haven't found any records to show where he's buried. And I have to say, I mean, a lot of what I wrote about Richard comes from secondary sources, well sourced and
Yeah.
reliable ones, but nonetheless secondary sources, because I just can't find
Mhm.
the primary sources, or a lot of them anyway. And which is one of the reasons I'm not quite sure how I'm related to Richard, which was what my last post related to him was about, because um, if you
Oh.
look on Ancestry and you look at trees, most trees, lots of trees, tell you he's my fourth great grandfather, but there is no evidence. And I know from DNA I'm definitely related to him. I'm sure I'm related to his parents, but I'm not sure that my third great grandfather, William Lang, was Richard's son. I think he may have been his nephew rather than his son, but I don't know for sure because I just can't find the documentation. But I'm definitely
Mm.
related somehow.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing about family history like this is that, you may not have it this first posting, but you will have it the next time you go back, and you have left behind such an extraordinary series of links and stories that somebody else can come along and pick up on it to where
Yeah.
you left off. And to me, that's the beauty, and the beauty of your being so careful. I just dropped the link to your first. Oh, there you go. Dr. Mary's looked up the value for you. And I
Gosh.
just dropped the link for the first in that 9-part series.
Mhm.
We do our very best to document what we know to the very best accuracy we can. And that's okay. Somebody else is going to come along later as new records are opened, new records become available. Now you have me excited. I'm actually next week on our 24th of August, I believe it is. I will be hosting Kathy Stone here for another of our Substack Live programs. And guess what? I will be in Georgia. I'm going
Mm.
to Atlanta for a little business trip for my husband. I get to tag along with. So I don't know if I'll be able to, touch libraries and historical societies, but I will be there from Georgia for what that's worth.
Oh, yes.
So if
Well,
you
I
need it.
think the good thing, as you say, the good thing about posting these things is that somebody may come along and say, "Oh, I know what that was," and and if anyone has any information I need, please do get in touch because it's
Well,
yeah,
Marion Lippert has just said that her lawyer wants to talk about this on Zoom right now. Is there a link about more about this story? Which is why I just dropped
yeah.
that in there. And it is, these stories build on each other. And that is what I'm trying to do with Stories 250. The whole point of Stories 250 is to be able to have all of us as a community to stop for a moment and think about where our ancestors were 250 years ago. Yeah, give or take 50 years, lifespan of that general age of enlightenment period. Where were our people? What were they doing? And tell us the story. You don't even have to have it published on Projectkin. I'll take one of those a month. But publish your story where it is. Go over to projectkin.org/stories250 dash map or dash timeline and or dash form, and you can tell us your story. Let us know what your story link is, and I'll add it to the timeline and the map. And it gives
Mm.
us a way to look at all of these together, and that map and timeline are live. starting with Jane's story. And my guest next month is Kyla Bayang. And my story in October will be Bill Moore. I have more stories coming. You know who you are. And I am always open to more. I'm going to certainly keep doing this through July 2026. But who knows? We'll see how this all goes because I think there are just so many of these pieces. Kathy Stone chimes in to say, I'm intrigued now to further investigate my stepfather's family who did come from the U.S. because, of course, Kathy Stone, we know as our host for Kathy's Corner, is in Calgary, Canada. All of these kinds of stories, we are connected as we tell stories. Yeah, we all have connections back to Europe too. And I think that is certainly something that all of us former colonies have in common, whether it's directly to England or for the most part, somebody somewhere came from somewhere else, which is why I found a particular charm. Oh, there's Kyla now. See, I thought you were out there. As we tell these stories. And I see Robin Stewart has joined us as well. I want to give her a little shout out as a special thanks for her many historical prompts and encouragements to the coterie community that she is building, because it is some of those kinds of prompts that have started this movement forward. And the whole point is, as we want to be doing these together. As some of you know, I routinely have feline visitors through these, doing a little photo bombing. So sure enough, they want to stay true to the brand. So they came for a visit. This is Zarabeth. So that is indeed a wonderful story. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time at this early hour, because it is
Not too
still
early.
not too early, but all of you out into Australia have taken the time to
A bit
join
early.
early. Thank you. Thank you. And it is an exciting way to share community and share stories. And we will keep at it later this week. I hope you will join me for my special program with Emma Explores, where we go back to England and she talks to us about the stories of wills and probate, as she gave us a preview of on Friday. So, digging into documents, where to pull from those, and then the practical stories themselves as they come out. And that's what we're all about, right? Thank you so
Mm.
much. It's a
Well,
pleasure.
thank you for the opportunity to tell the story.
Hey, all I do is fire up the blender here and poof, things happen. Thank you again. Thank you again. I'll share a little picture of this craziness I've got going for my own configuration, which is why you can see me going like this. I've got a hat on an iPad. That's how it works. There, you can see the hat. Again, thank you. Talk soon. Bye bye.
Bye.